After years of being homeless, I learned my godmother had left me her entire estate. But my parents, the same people who kicked me out onto the street when I was 16, ran to the lawyer's office to claim it. It's ours by right, they said. But when the video of my godmother's final will started to play, their faces turned white because she had one last devastating secret to tell. This is a story about a 20-year-old lie and the truth that refused to stay buried. Before we open that will, I'd love to know, what city are you watching from today? And be sure to subscribe for more stories every single day. Okay, let's go back to the beginning of this story. For the last 7 years, my life had been a masterclass in survival. I learned which city park benches were the safest to sleep on, which soup kitchens served the warmest meals, and how to make myself invisible, a ghost haunting the prosperous streets of a city that had no place for me. This life had begun on the night of my 16th birthday, the night my own parents, Richard and Susan, had packed my belongings into 2 black trash bags, driven me to the edge of town, and left me there with $100 and the cold, final words of my father. "You're a disappointment, and you are no longer our problem." Their excuse, the one they told the rest of the family, was that I was rebellious and out of control. The truth was far simpler and far more cruel. They were social climbers, obsessed with their own perfect image, and I, a quiet, artistic, and slightly awkward teenager, did not fit into the picture. They wanted a daughter who was a cheerleader, a debutante. They got a poet. So they had simply erased me. In the years that followed, there was only one person who had refused to let me disappear completely: my godmother, Miss Evelyn Reed. She was a woman of immense wealth, a friend of my parents from a world they desperately wanted to be a part of. But more than that, she was a woman of profound and deeply secret kindness. She had found me in those first terrifying weeks on the street, and she had become my lifeline. She couldn't take me in. Her own health was failing, a fragile heart condition that left her a prisoner in her own grand, silent mansion. And my parents, in their final act of cruelty, had forbidden her from helping me. "If you take her in," my mother had told her, a threat disguised as a concern, "we will cut off all contact. You will never see us or your goddaughter again. She is a bad influence, and we are protecting you from her." So our relationship became a secret. Once a month, she would have her driver bring me to a quiet, discreet location, a small cafe, a hidden corner of a museum, and she would sit with me for an hour. She would make sure I was eating. She would slip me $100, money I knew she could not spare from the strict allowance my parents now controlled for her care. She was my only connection to a world of warmth and love, a fragile, secret thread of decency in a life of cold, hard survival. The news of her death reached me through a small, formal notice in the newspaper. I stood in a public library reading her obituary, and the last flickering light in my dark world went out. I did not go to the funeral. I knew my parents would be there, performing their role as her closest, dearest friends. I would not have been welcome. I mourned her alone in the quiet, anonymous solitude of the city's homeless shelter. It was a week later that the impossible happened. A man in an expensive suit found me at the shelter. He was a lawyer, a Mr. Chen, and he handed me a crisp, white envelope. It was a formal summons, the reading of Miss Evelyn Reed's final will and testament, and I, Aurora, the homeless girl my parents had thrown away, was named as a primary beneficiary. I knew it had to be a mistake, or more likely, a final, cruel joke from my parents. But a small, foolish flicker of loyalty to my godmother made me go. I walked into the grand, intimidating law office, dressed in the only clean, respectable clothes I owned, a pair of jeans and a sweater I had bought at a second-hand store. My parents were already there, sitting in plush leather chairs. They looked at me, and their faces were a mixture of pure, unadulterated shock and a deep, immediate, and possessive rage. They saw my presence not as a final wish of their deceased friend, but as a threat to what they believed was rightfully theirs. My father, Richard, was the first to speak, his voice a low, angry growl. "What is she doing here?" he had demanded of the lawyer. "This is a private matter, for family." My client was very specific, Mr. Davis. Miss Aurora was to be present. He then began the reading. The will was simple. A few small bequests to charities, and then the final, stunning clause. "The entirety of my remaining estate," the lawyer read, "including my home, my investments, and all liquid assets, a sum totaling over $10 million, I leave to my beloved goddaughter, Aurora." The room exploded. "This is an outrage," my mother, Susan, chimed in, her voice a shrill, theatrical cry of injustice. "We are the ones who cared for Evelyn in her final years. We managed her affairs. We were there for her. This girl," she finally deigned to look at me, her eyes full of a venomous contempt, "has been a homeless, worthless vagrant for 7 years. What possible claim could she have?" I just stood there, my hands clasped in front of me, and I absorbed their poison. I was used to it. Their words could no longer hurt me. I had endured the cold nights, the gnawing hunger, the profound, soul-crushing loneliness of being a child with no home, all because of their greed and their pride. I had survived, and that, I was beginning to realize, was a power they could not comprehend. They thought this was about money. They had no idea it was about justice. "If you are quite finished," Mr. Chen said, his voice now laced with a thin, sharp edge of impatience, "we can proceed with the reading of Miss Reed's final will and testament." He gestured for us to sit. My parents took the plush leather chairs opposite the lawyer's desk. I took a small, hard chair against the wall, a position I was, by now, very accustomed to. The outcast, the observer. "Very well," my father said, leaning back in his chair with a look of arrogant, proprietary confidence. He looked at me one last time and sneered. "Let's get this over with. My wife and I have a lunch reservation at the club." Mr. Chen just gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. He reached for a remote control on his desk and pointed it at a large, dark television screen that was mounted on the wall. "Miss Reed," he began, chose to deliver her final testament in a slightly more personal format. He pressed a button. The screen flickered to life, and the room was filled with the warm, kind, and impossibly familiar face of my godmother, Miss Evelyn Reed. She was sitting in her favorite armchair, a soft cashmere blanket over her legs, but her eyes, the eyes I had missed so dearly, were sharp and clear, and full of a profound and final purpose. My parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had been expecting the dry, impersonal language of a legal document. They were not prepared for a final, posthumous conversation with the woman whose trust they had so profoundly betrayed. "Hello, Richard. Hello, Susan." My godmother's voice filled the silent room, her tone a mixture of a deep, weary sadness and an unshakable, righteous anger. "If you are watching this, then I am gone. And you are here, I am sure, expecting to be rewarded for your friendship." She then looked directly into the camera, and it felt as though she were looking directly into my soul. "And hello, my dearest Aurora," she said, her voice now softening with a love so profound it was a physical thing. "I am so sorry I had to leave you, but I have left you a final gift, the gift of the truth." I watched as my parents' faces began to pale. This was not the simple reading of a will they had expected. This was a reckoning, and my godmother, my quiet, gentle, and brilliant godmother, was about to serve as the judge, the jury, and the star witness, all from beyond the grave. "Richard, Susan," my godmother's voice continued, her tone now turning to steel, "let's talk about the educational trust I established for Aurora on the day she was born, a trust of $100,000 intended for her college education."
She looked down at a stack of papers in her lap on the video. And let's talk about these. On the screen, next to her, a series of documents appeared. They were bank statements, withdrawal slips, all of them signed by my father, Richard, and my mother, Susan. I have here, Miss Reed's voice continued, a cold, quiet fury underneath her words, the complete financial records for that trust. Records that show, over the course of 10 years, a series of systematic and, frankly, pathetic withdrawals. Withdrawals that paid for your country club membership, for your new luxury car, for your family vacations to Europe. You did not just fail your daughter, she said, her voice a low, angry rumble. You stole from her. You stole her future to fund your own shallow, materialistic lifestyle. She's lying, my mother whispered, her voice a strangled, panicked thing. The old woman was senile. She didn't know what she was saying. But the documents on the screen, the ones with their own undeniable signatures, told a different story. And then, my godmother on the screen continued, her voice now full of a deep, profound sadness and disgust. And then, when she turned 16, when the money was finally all gone, and she was old enough to start asking questions about the college fund that no longer existed, you did something even more monstrous. You couldn't face the consequences of your own greed. So you manufactured a crisis. You called her rebellious. You called her out of control. And you threw your own child, your beautiful, kind, and loving daughter, out onto the street. You cast her out into the darkness to cover up your own pathetic, greedy, and unforgivable crime. The truth in all its ugly, brutal detail was finally out. I looked at my parents. My father was staring at the screen, his face a ruin of gray, defeated shame. My mother was openly weeping, not with remorse, but with the pure, selfish terror of being so completely and so publicly exposed. My godmother, on the screen, then took a deep, final breath. Her expression softened once more as she looked back into the camera, back at me. "And so," she said, her voice now calm and full of a final, quiet authority, "my last will and testament is not just a distribution of my assets. It is an act of justice. It is a final and long overdue rebalancing of the scales. My parents were in ruins, their monstrous 20-year-old secret exposed to the world in a cold, hard, and undeniable fashion. But as I looked at my godmother's face on that screen, I knew this wasn't just about punishing them. It was about her final act of love for me. And I had no idea what form that powerful, final, and redemptive love was about to take. I sat on the hard chair against the wall, my own grief a distant, forgotten country, my entire being focused on the face of my godmother on the screen. She was smiling, a look of such profound and powerful love that it felt like a warm hand on my own cold cheek. Behind me, I could hear the quiet, panicked, and ragged breathing of my parents. They had been exposed. They had been condemned. And now we were all about to hear the sentence. "To my dear, brave, and beloved goddaughter Aurora," she continued, a warm, clear sound that filled the silent, sterile conference room, "I leave the entirety of my estate, the house, the investment portfolio, the charitable foundation that bears my name. All of it is now yours." The words were so simple, so direct, and so absolutely, earth-shatteringly impossible that my mind simply refused to process them. It was a sum of money so vast, a reality so far removed from my own life of sleeping in shelters and surviving on the scraps of the world, that it had no meaning. "It is not a gift, my dear," she continued, as if she could see the look of stunned, disbelieving shock on my face. "It is a restoration. It is the future that was stolen from you, the one that was supposed to be paid for by your educational trust, returned to you 100-fold. Use it well. Build a life of joy and of purpose. It is all I have ever wanted for you." She then turned her attention, her expression hardening once more into a mask of cold, righteous fury, back to the camera, back to my parents. "And as for my dear, lifelong friends, Richard and Susan," she said, her voice dripping with a quiet, lethal irony, "I have left you something as well, a final gift from me. I have left you a choice." She gestured to a thick, sealed manila folder that was sitting on her lap in the video. In the real world, in the conference room, the lawyer, Mr. Chen, opened his briefcase and produced an identical-looking folder, placing it on the polished table between my parents. "Inside that folder," my godmother's voice explained, "is all the evidence of your crimes, the bank statements from the trust, the withdrawal slips with your signatures, a sworn affidavit from my own private investigator who has been documenting your activities for the past 5 years. It is a complete and legally prosecutable case file for felony embezzlement." My mother let out a small, strangled sob. "You have 2 options," Miss Reed said, her voice now a final, quiet, and utterly inescapable judgment. "Option 1, you will sign the full confession that my lawyer has prepared for you. You will cede any and all claim to my estate. You will release any future claim on your daughter Aurora's new assets. And you will, in this room, right now, give her the apology you have owed her for the last 7 years of her life. If you do this, this evidence," she tapped the folder on her lap, "will remain sealed in my lawyer's vault forever." She paused, letting the weight of her mercy settle in the room. "Option 2, she continued, her voice now as cold and as hard as a gravestone, "is that you can refuse. You can hold on to your pathetic, arrogant pride. And if you do, my lawyer, Mr. Chen, has my final and legally binding instruction to walk out of this room, get in his car, and drive this entire file directly to the district attorney's office. You will be charged, you will be prosecuted, and I assure you, you will go to prison." The video ended, the screen went black. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Mr. Chen calmly opened the folder he had placed on the table. He pulled out a pre-written, multi-page confession and placed it in the center of the table, alongside a single, elegant fountain pen. "You have 1 hour to decide," the lawyer said quietly. My parents did not need an hour. Their partnership of greed and deceit, which had seemed so strong just a half hour before, crumbled into a pathetic, ugly mess of blame and recrimination right before my eyes. "This is your fault," my mother hissed at my father, her voice a low, panicked whisper. "You were the one who spent all the money on your stupid investments." "My fault?" he whispered back, his own face a mask of pure, terrified rage. "You were the one who had to have the new car, the country club membership, the designer clothes." I did not stay to watch the rest of their pathetic, ugly implosion. I stood up, I walked to the table, I looked down at my broken, weeping, and utterly defeated parents. I felt no pity, I felt no anger, I just felt a profound and deeply sad sense of distance. You know, the worst part of all of this, the truly unforgivable part, is not the money you stole. It was the 7 years. The 7 years of my life you threw away. The years I could have spent with her. I nodded towards the dark television screen. You didn't just steal my money. You stole my time with her. And that is something I will never, ever forgive you for. I then turned and walked towards the door, leaving them to their terrible and richly deserved choice. The war was over. The truth had been told, and I was, for the first time in a very long time, finally and completely free. I walked out of that cold, sterile law office and into the bright, noisy, and chaotic afternoon of a city that suddenly felt like it was mine. The weight of 7 years of homelessness, of being unseen, of being a ghost in my own life seemed to lift from my shoulders, a physical burden dissolving into the thin city air. I had walked into that room a beggar. I was walking out an heiress. But more than that, I was walking out with the one thing I had craved for so long: justice. The phone call from the lawyer, Mr. Chen, came later that day. His voice was full of a quiet, professional satisfaction. "Ms. Aurora, I am calling to inform you that your parents have made a decision. They have signed the full confession. The evidence regarding the embezzlement of your trust fund will now be permanently sealed. The estate, in its entirety, is now officially and legally yours." Did they say anything? I asked, a small, foolish part of me still hoping for some sign of remorse. There was a slight hesitation on the other end of the line. "They did not," he said finally. "They just signed the papers, and they left."
A few days later, a stiff, formal-looking letter arrived at the homeless shelter where I was still staying. It was from them. It was not a letter of apology written from the heart. It was a cold, legally mandated statement, clearly drafted by a lawyer, full of phrases like regret for any perceived wrongdoing and a desire for an amicable resolution. It was not an apology. It was a surrender. It was the last I ever heard from them. The weeks that followed were a surreal education in a world I had only ever looked at from the outside. There were meetings with bankers, with investment managers, with estate planners, men in expensive suits who, just a month ago, would have stepped over me on the street, now called me ma'am and spoke in hushed, respectful tones. But my first act as a woman of means was not to buy a new car or a fancy apartment. It was to honor the woman who had given me this second chance. I took over the chairmanship of her charitable foundation, the one she had so lovingly mentioned in her will. And I began to read. I read her journals, her private letters, the records of her quiet and often anonymous philanthropy. And I discovered that my godmother, Miss Reed, had not just been a kind woman, she had been a warrior for the forgotten, a champion for the lost. It's been a year now. I am standing on a stage under the warm, bright lights of a newly opened building. It is a beautiful, safe, and modern facility with warm beds, a hot kitchen, a library, and job training resources. It is Evelyn's house, the first of what I plan to be many new, state-of-the-art shelters for homeless and at-risk youth. It was the first major project I funded as the new head of the foundation. As I look out at the crowd of supporters, of city officials, of the hopeful, brave faces of the very first residents of this new home, I think about my parents. I think about their final, sneering words to me in that law office. A homeless, worthless vagrant. They were half right. I was homeless, but I was never, ever worthless. My worth was not something that could be measured by a bank account or a fancy address. It was a quiet, resilient, and unbreakable thing that had been forged in the cold, hard fire of survival. My godmother had seen that. She had not just left me her money, she had left me her faith. She had seen the strength in a girl who had been cast out, and she had given that girl the tools not just to survive, but to build something better for others who were walking the same lonely path. This is my legacy now. This is my purpose, to turn my own pain into a promise to every forgotten child that they are not invisible, that they are not worthless, and that they are not alone. And that is a fortune more valuable than any amount of money. An absolutely incredible story of a life turned around and the beautiful legacy of a godmother's love. What a powerful journey from homelessness to hope. What do you think of the way Miss Reed delivered her final justice through her will? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by Aurora's incredible story, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more powerful and emotional stories. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.